The fluorescent lights of Henderson Manufacturing's engineering department hummed with their usual monotonous drone, as Marcus Washington adjusted his reading glasses for the third time that morning. At 63, he'd learned to ignore the minor inconveniences of aging, the slight tremor in his hands when he was tired, the reading glasses that seemed to migrate around his workspace, the way his knees protested after climbing the stairs to the second-floor offices. What he couldn't ignore was the memo sitting on his desk. Workforce Optimization Initiative, it read in corporate speak that barely masked its true meaning. Marcus had seen these before. 27 years at Henderson Manufacturing had taught him to read between the lines of management jargon. He ran his hand over his close-cropped grey hair, a habit from his days in the Marines that had stuck with him through 3 decades of civilian life. Outside the windows, Detroit's October sky hung heavy and grey, promising rain before the afternoon shift change. The office around him buzzed with the usual Tuesday morning energy. Younger engineers hunched over CAD software, their fingers flying across keyboards with the kind of speed Marcus had never quite mastered. He preferred the old way: sketch it out first, think it through, then commit it to the computer. It took longer, sure, but it meant fewer mistakes downstream. Marcus got a minute. He looked up to see Brian Kowalski, the department head, standing in the doorway. Brian was 42, wore expensive suits that didn't quite fit his frame, and had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He'd been promoted over Marcus 3 years ago, despite having half the experience. Of course. Marcus stood, his chair creaking in protest. He'd been sitting in the same chair since 2003, had requested a new one twice, and had been told both times that the budget didn't allow for it. Brian's office was everything Marcus's cubicle wasn't: spacious, modern, with a view of the Detroit River. Photos on the wall showed Brian shaking hands with the CEO, Brian at the company golf tournament, Brian receiving some award Marcus couldn't quite make out. "Have a seat." Brian gestured to one of the sleek chairs across from his desk. "I wanted to talk to you about the Workforce Optimization Initiative." Marcus sat, his spine straight, despite the anxiety crawling up it. "I figured as much. Look, Marcus, you've been a valuable part of this team." Brian's tone had that rehearsed quality of someone who'd practiced this speech in the mirror. "But the industry's changing. We need to think about the future. Fresh perspectives, new energy." "I see." Marcus kept his voice level, professional. It was the same voice he'd used in the Marines when a superior officer was making a decision he disagreed with but couldn't challenge. "The truth is, and I'm just being honest here because I respect you, the board is pushing for a younger workforce. They think innovation comes from youth." Brian leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. "And between you and me, they might have a point. No offense, but at your age, how much innovation can we really expect?" The words landed like a physical blow, but Marcus didn't flinch. He'd faced worse in his life: drill sergeants who'd screamed in his face, supervisors who'd questioned his abilities because of the color of his skin, managers who'd passed him over for promotions he'd earned. But this felt different. This felt final. "I've submitted 17 patents for this company," Marcus said quietly. 6 of them are still in active production, generating millions in revenue. "Sure, but when was the last one? 5 years ago? 6? Brian waved a hand dismissively. "The market's moved on, Marcus. We need people who understand AI integration, IoT systems, Industry 4.0. You're brilliant at what you do, but what you do is becoming obsolete." Marcus thought about the project he'd been working on for the past 3 months in his spare time. A hydraulic pressure optimization system that could reduce energy consumption in their primary production line by 35%. He'd run the numbers a dozen times, built a prototype in his garage using salvaged parts. It worked. He knew it worked. "I have something I've been developing," he began. "Marcus." Brian held up a hand, his smile tight and patronizing. "I appreciate the enthusiasm, but we're not looking for incremental improvements to legacy systems. We need disruption. Transformation." He stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "Look, you've got options. Early retirement package, transition to a consultant role with reduced hours. Think about it. We'll need an answer by end of week." Marcus walked back to his cubicle in a daze. The floor seemed to tilt slightly under his feet, or maybe that was just the weight of 30 years of loyalty being dismissed in a 15-minute meeting. He sat down at his desk, looking at the framed photo of his late wife, Sarah. She'd been gone 2 years now, cancer taking her just after their 40th anniversary. She would have known what to say, how to put this in perspective. "You okay, Marcus?" He turned to see Jennifer Chen, one of the younger engineers, leaning over the cubicle wall. She was 28, brilliant, and one of the few people in the department who still asked for his advice. "Just a meeting with Brian," he said, managing a smile. "Nothing to worry about." "Was it about the optimization initiative?" Her face showed genuine concern. "I heard they're targeting senior staff. It's complete garbage, if you ask me. You've forgotten more about hydraulics than most of these guys will ever know." "I appreciate that, Jennifer." Marcus looked at his computer screen, where his hydraulic pressure optimization design sat half-finished. "But maybe they're right. Maybe it's time for fresh blood." "Don't say that." Jennifer glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered her voice. "You know what your problem is. You're too humble, you do incredible work, and then you just file it away instead of making noise about it. Meanwhile, guys like Brian take credit for other people's ideas and get promoted." She wasn't wrong. Marcus had watched it happen countless times. His suggestions ending up in someone else's presentation, his solutions credited to the team rather than to him specifically. He'd told himself it didn't matter, that the work was what counted. But now, facing forced retirement, he wondered if his humility had been mistaken for obsolescence. The rest of the day passed in a fog. Marcus went through the motions, reviewing specifications, answering emails, attending a production meeting where he was the only person over 50. When 5 o'clock came, he packed up his things with mechanical precision, nodding goodbye to the few colleagues who looked up from their screens. The drive home took him through neighborhoods he'd known his whole life. Past the elementary school where he'd learned to read, past the church where he'd married Sarah, past the hospital where she'd spent her final days. Detroit had changed. Some neighborhoods revitalized, others still struggling. The automotive industry's collapse and slow recovery, written in abandoned factories and new tech startups existing side by side. His house was a modest brick bungalow in a working-class neighborhood that had somehow avoided both complete decay and aggressive gentrification. He pulled into the driveway, noting that the lawn needed mowing one more time before winter set in. The garage door opener groaned as it lifted, revealing his workshop, a cluttered space filled with tools, parts, and half-finished projects that represented a lifetime of tinkering and problem-solving. The prototype sat on his workbench, a tangle of hydraulic lines, pressure sensors, and control valves that probably looked like junk to an untrained eye. But Marcus saw its potential. He'd based it on a problem he'd noticed 6 months ago, inefficiencies in the pressure regulation system that controlled the company's main production line. Small fluctuations that added up to massive energy waste over the course of a year. He'd mentioned it in a meeting once. Brian had nodded, said interesting, and then moved on to the next agenda item. So Marcus had started working on it himself, spending weekends in his garage, ordering parts with his own money, running calculations by hand, and then double-checking them with software. He picked up a wrench, then set it down. His hands were shaking, and not from age or fatigue, from anger, from hurt. From the accumulated weight of being told, in countless subtle and not-so-subtle ways, that his experience didn't matter, that his knowledge was obsolete, that he was too old to contribute. "Too old to matter," he said to the empty garage, testing how the words felt. They felt like poison. His phone buzzed, a text from his daughter Monica, a lawyer in Chicago. "Hey Dad, just checking in. How was your day?" He stared at the message for a long moment before replying, "Fine. Long meeting. How's the case going?" The lie felt necessary. Monica had enough to worry about without adding her father's employment troubles to the list. She'd already tried to convince him to move to Chicago to be closer to her and his granddaughter. But Detroit was home. This house, this garage, this life, they were all he had left of Sarah, of the dreams they'd built together. Marcus turned back to the prototype. The technical challenge had been interesting, creating a system that could predict pressure fluctuations milliseconds before they occurred and adjust accordingly, maintaining perfect equilibrium while reducing energy consumption. He'd solved it, using a combination of old-school mechanical engineering and modern sensor technology, drawing on decades of experience with hydraulic systems. But now, standing in his garage with Brian's words still echoing in his head, he wondered what the point had been. If the company didn't want his ideas, if they saw him as dead weight rather than an asset, why should he keep trying? He reached for the power switch to the prototype, his finger hovering over it. One flip and he could shut it all down, pack it away, accept the early retirement package, and fade into irrelevance. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. Henderson Manufacturing stock drops 15% on quarterly earnings miss. Marcus opened the article, skimming through the corporate spin to the real numbers underneath. Production costs were up significantly, eating into margins. The CEO was quoted saying they were exploring all options to improve efficiency and competitiveness. He looked at his prototype again, then at the article, then back at the prototype. "Too old to matter," he repeated, but this time the words felt different. Not like poison, like fuel. He turned on the workshop lights, pulled up a stool, and got to work. If they thought he was obsolete, he'd prove them wrong. Not for them. Not even for himself, really. For Sarah, who'd always believed in him. For Monica, who deserved to be proud of her father. For every engineer who'd ever been told they were past their prime. Outside, the promised rain began to fall, drumming on the garage roof with steady insistence. Inside, Marcus Washington, 63 years old and supposedly too old to innovate, refined and perfected the invention that would change everything. He just didn't know it yet. The rain that had started Tuesday evening turned into a persistent drizzle that lasted through Wednesday and into Thursday morning. Marcus had barely slept, spending both nights in his garage, fine-tuning the prototype until his eyes burned and his back ached from hunching over the workbench. By Thursday afternoon, he had something he was confident in, a fully functional hydraulic pressure optimization system that could be retrofitted into Henderson Manufacturing's existing infrastructure with minimal downtime. The question was, what to do with it? He sat in his cubicle Friday morning, the deadline Brian had given him looming. The early retirement package documents sat in his inbox, marked urgent. All he had to do was sign them, and he could walk away with a decent severance and his dignity mostly intact, or what passed for dignity when you were being pushed out for being too old. "Marcus, you coming to the production floor meeting?" Jennifer appeared at his cubicle, tablet in hand. "Brian wants everyone there." "Something about a major announcement." He glanced at the clock. 10:30. The meeting wasn't supposed to start until 11. He moved it up? "Emergency session, apparently. The board's here." Jennifer's expression was grim. "Rumor is they're announcing layoffs, like major ones." Marcus's stomach dropped. He'd seen this before, too. Companies didn't bring in the board for good news. He grabbed his notebook, an old-fashioned paper one that some of the younger engineers smirked at, and followed Jennifer to the production floor. The main assembly area was a cathedral of American manufacturing, 3 stories high with massive overhead cranes and production lines that stretched the length of 2 football fields. Henderson Manufacturing made hydraulic systems for everything from construction equipment to aerospace applications. It was precision work, demanding work, and Marcus had spent 27 years of his life making sure it was done right. About 200 employees had gathered near the main control station, a nervous energy rippling through the crowd. Marcus spotted Brian standing with 3 board members he recognized from company newsletters. All men, all white, all wearing suits that cost more than Marcus made in a month. The CEO, Richard Henderson III, stepped up to a microphone. He was 55 but looked younger, with the kind of tan that came from vacation homes in Florida and the kind of confidence that came from inherited wealth. His grandfather had founded the company in 1952. Richard had taken over 10 years ago and promptly started running it like a tech startup instead of a manufacturing firm. "Thank you all for gathering on short notice," Richard began, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "I want to be direct with you because you deserve honesty. Our third-quarter earnings were disappointing. Production costs are up 23% year over year, while revenue has grown only 8%. We're losing our competitive edge." Marcus watched the faces around him, welders, machinists, engineers, quality control specialists. These weren't just employees. They were people with mortgages and families and dreams that depended on Henderson Manufacturing staying solvent. "The board and I have made some difficult decisions," Richard continued. "Effective immediately, we're implementing a comprehensive restructuring program. This will include a reduction in workforce of approximately 30% across all departments, with a focus on streamlining operations and reducing redundancy." The murmur that went through the crowd was like a physical thing, a wave of shock and fear. 30%. That was over 200 people in this facility alone. "We're also announcing a strategic pivot toward automation and AI-driven systems," Richard said. "The manufacturing landscape is changing, and Henderson needs to change with it. We've partnered with Automatech Solutions to implement a fully integrated smart factory system. Over the next 18 months, we'll be transitioning many of our manual processes to automated ones." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He knew Automatech. They'd pitched their system to Henderson 3 years ago, and Marcus had reviewed the proposal. It was expensive, proprietary, and, in his professional opinion, overcomplicated for what they actually needed. But it was flashy, and it came with consultants in expensive suits who spoke the same language as board members. "I know this is difficult news," Richard was saying. "HR will begin individual meetings next week to discuss severance packages and transition support. But I want to emphasize that this is necessary for Henderson's survival. We need to innovate or die, and innovation requires making hard choices." Jennifer leaned over to Marcus. "This is insane," she whispered. "The Automatech system costs $8 million. We could fix our efficiency problems for a fraction of that if they'd just listened to the engineers who actually work here." Marcus nodded, his mind racing. $8 million for an automated system that would take 18 months to implement, during which they'd still be bleeding money from inefficiency. Meanwhile, his prototype sat in his garage, built for less than $10,000 in parts, ready to be installed in a matter of weeks. The meeting broke up with shell-shocked employees, clustering in small groups, speculation and anxiety thick in the air. Marcus walked back to his cubicle in a daze, Jennifer trailing behind him. "Are you going to take the retirement package?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. The smart move, the safe move, was to take the money and run. Let Henderson make their expensive mistake with Automatech. It wasn't his problem anymore. But then he thought about the 200 families that would lose their livelihoods. He thought about the company his grandfather's generation had built, being gutted by executives who saw employees as line items on a spreadsheet. He thought about Brian's smug face telling him he was too old to innovate. "No," he said finally, "I don't think I am." Jennifer's eyes widened. "You're going to fight it." "I'm going to present an alternative." Marcus pulled up his design files on his computer, the ones he'd been refining for months. "I have a hydraulic optimization system that could cut our energy costs by 35%. Implementation would cost less than $200,000 and could be completed in 6 weeks with minimal disruption." "Marcus, that's incredible. Why haven't you shown this to anyone?" "I tried. Brian wasn't interested." He saved the files to a USB drive, his hands steady now despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "But maybe Richard will be." "You're going to go straight to the CEO?" Jennifer looked both impressed and worried. That's definitely a choice. Brian's going to lose his mind. Brian can fire me. I'm being pushed out anyway." Marcus pocketed the USB drive. "But before I go, I'm going to make sure they know what they're giving up." He spent the rest of Friday afternoon preparing a presentation. Not the corporate PowerPoint style that Brian favored, full of buzzwords and vague promises, but a detailed technical breakdown showing exactly how his system worked, what it would cost, and what it would save. He included comparison charts with the Automatech proposal, highlighting the differences in cost, implementation time, and projected ROI. By 5 o'clock, he had a 15-page report that he was confident could save Henderson Manufacturing millions of dollars and dozens of jobs. The question was whether anyone would listen to a 63-year-old engineer they'd already written off as obsolete. He drove home through rush-hour traffic, the report printed and bound in the passenger seat. The rain had finally stopped, but the sky remained overcast, heavy with the promise of more to come. On the radio, a news anchor was discussing the national unemployment rate, and Marcus turned it off. He didn't need reminders of what failure would mean. Monica called as he pulled into his driveway. "Hey, Dad. Just wanted to check in before the weekend. You sound tired. Everything okay?" Marcus looked at his garage where the prototype waited. He looked at the report on the passenger seat. He thought about lying, about protecting his daughter from his problems like he'd been doing for months. Instead, he told her the truth. "The company's doing layoffs, 30% of the workforce, including a lot of the senior staff. They offered me early retirement." "Oh, Dad." Monica's voice was soft with concern. "I'm so sorry, but maybe it's not the worst thing. You could move up here, spend more time with Emma. She misses her grandfather." "I'm not taking the package," Marcus said. "At least not yet. I have one more play to make." He told her about the prototype, about the presentation he'd prepared, about his plan to approach the CEO directly. He expected her to try to talk him out of it, to counsel caution and pragmatism like the lawyer she was. Instead, she laughed. "That's the Marine I remember. Mom would be proud. Or she'd tell me I'm being stubborn and foolish. She'd tell you both things, but she'd still be proud." Monica paused. "Listen, Dad, I know you've been struggling since Mom passed. I know the house feels empty, and work has been your anchor. But don't do this just because you're afraid of what comes after. Do it because you believe in it." Marcus thought about that after they hung up. Did he believe in it? In his invention, yes. In his abilities, despite what Brian had said, yes. But in Henderson Manufacturing's willingness to listen to him? He went into the garage and looked at the prototype. It was ungainly, built from salvaged parts and held together with more ingenuity than elegance. But it worked. He'd tested it 100 times, run the simulations, verified the numbers. It was solid engineering, the kind his father had taught him, the kind that had built America's industrial might in the first place, the kind that corporate boards in their infinite wisdom had decided was obsolete. Marcus pulled out his phone and composed an email to Richard Henderson's executive assistant. It was bold, probably too bold, but he'd already decided to burn his bridges with Brian, might as well do it spectacularly. Subject: cost-saving alternative to Automatech proposal. Ms. Patterson, my name is Marcus Washington, Senior Hydraulic Engineer in the Detroit facility. I have developed a pressure optimization system that could reduce production costs by 35% with an implementation cost of less than $200,000 and a 6-week timeline. I would appreciate 15 minutes of Mr. Henderson's time to present this alternative to the Automatech solution announced today. I understand this is an unusual request, but given the announced restructuring, I believe the board should have all options before making a final decision. Respectfully, Marcus Washington. He stared at the email for a full minute before hitting send. There was no taking it back now. His phone buzzed almost immediately. For a wild moment, he thought it might be a response. Instead, it was a message in the department group chat from Brian. Reminder: anyone discussing confidential company restructuring plans externally will face immediate termination. Marcus smiled grimly. They were afraid of leaks, afraid of bad press, afraid of losing control of the narrative. Good, let them be afraid. He'd spent 27 years being afraid of being passed over, afraid of making waves, afraid of losing what little security he'd built. He wasn't afraid anymore. Saturday morning brought another surprise. An email from Richard Henderson's assistant, time-stamped 7:15 a.m. Mr. Henderson can meet with you Monday at 8 a.m. in his office. Please bring all supporting documentation. You'll have 30 minutes. Marcus read the email 3 times to make sure it was real. 30 minutes. That was 29 minutes more than he'd expected. He spent the weekend refining his presentation, practicing his pitch, and running one final test of the prototype to make absolutely sure it worked as advertised. Sunday evening, he called Monica. I got the meeting, he told her. Monday morning, 30 minutes with the CEO. Dad, that's amazing. Are you ready? As ready as I'll ever be. He looked at the notes spread across his kitchen table, the prototype gleaming under the garage lights. Monica, if this doesn't work, it'll work, she interrupted. And if it doesn't, you still have options. You're brilliant, Dad. Any company would be lucky to have you. After they hung up, Marcus sat in his living room, looking at the photos on the mantel. Sarah on their wedding day, young and beautiful and full of hope, Monica's graduation from law school, his Marine Corps service photo, a young man in uniform who'd thought he could change the world. Maybe that young Marine had been naive, but he'd also been brave. Marcus went to bed early, setting 3 alarms to make sure he'd wake up on time. He lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around him, and tried not to think about everything that could go wrong. Instead, he thought about Sarah, about the advice she'd given him 100 times over 40 years of marriage. The only way to guarantee failure is not to try. Tomorrow, he'd try. And whatever happened, at least he wouldn't be someone who'd let fear and doubt stop him from fighting for what he believed in. At least he wouldn't be too old to matter. Marcus arrived at Henderson Manufacturing at 7:15 Monday morning, 45 minutes before his scheduled meeting with Richard Henderson. The executive parking lot was already half full, expensive sedans and SUVs gleaming under the parking lot lights in the pre-dawn darkness. November had arrived over the weekend, bringing with it the bone-deep chill that would characterize Detroit for the next 4 months. He'd worn his best suit, a charcoal grey one that Sarah had helped him pick out for Monica's law school graduation 5 years ago. It felt strange after years of casual engineering department attire, khakis and button-downs that could survive the occasional trip to the production floor. His tie was too tight, or maybe that was just nerves constricting his throat. The prototype sat in a reinforced plastic case in the back of his truck, along with his presentation materials and a laptop loaded with simulation videos and performance data. He'd practiced his pitch so many times over the weekend that Monica had finally told him to stop, that he sounded robotic from over-rehearsal. "Just tell them what you know," she'd said during their Sunday night phone call. "You're the expert, Dad. Act like it." Easy for her to say. She commanded courtrooms with the kind of confidence he'd never quite mastered. Marcus had always been more comfortable with machines than people, with problems that had clear solutions rather than the messy variables of human interaction. The executive floor was on the building's top level, a world away from the engineering department's utilitarian cubicles. Thick carpet muffled his footsteps. Original artwork adorned the walls, Detroit industrial scenes that probably cost more than his annual salary. The receptionist's desk was empty this early, but Richard Henderson's assistant, Patricia Patterson, was already at her post outside the CEO's office. She was in her mid-50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of efficient demeanor that suggested she'd been dealing with corporate executives for longer than Marcus had been an engineer. "Mr. Washington?" She looked up from her computer, her expression neutral but not unfriendly. "You're early." "I wanted to make sure I had everything set up," Marcus said, gesturing to the case he was carrying. "I appreciate Mr. Henderson taking the time to meet with me." "He's intrigued," Patricia said, and something in her tone suggested that didn't happen often. "Fair warning. He's already in a meeting with the Automatech representatives." They arrived at 6:30 to do a final pitch before the board vote this afternoon. Marcus felt his stomach drop. "I didn't realize the vote was today." It wasn't supposed to be until next week, but Automatech pushed for an accelerated timeline. Something about a competing offer they need to respond to. Patricia's eyes met his, and he saw something there. Sympathy, maybe, or respect. "You'll have your 30 minutes, Mr. Washington. Make them count." She let him into the conference room adjacent to Richard's office, a space that could seat 20 people around a massive oak table, with windows overlooking the Detroit River and the Canadian shoreline beyond. Marcus set up his laptop, connected it to the room's presentation system, and arranged his printed materials at each seat. The prototype he placed at the head of the table where Richard would sit. At 7:55, voices drifted in from the hallway. Marcus recognized Richard Henderson's laugh, then a voice he didn't know, smooth, confident, probably one of the Automatech consultants. His hands started to shake, and he gripped the edge of the table until they steadied. The door opened. Richard Henderson entered first, followed by two men in their 30s wearing expensive suits and carrying tablets. They stopped when they saw Marcus, surprise flickering across their faces. "Mr. Washington," Richard said, checking his watch. "Right on time." "Gentlemen, this is one of our senior hydraulic engineers. Marcus, this is David Chen and Robert Martinez from Automatech Solutions." The handshakes were perfunctory, the Automatech representatives clearly wondering what Marcus was doing in their meeting. Richard gestured for everyone to sit, taking his place at the head of the table where Marcus had positioned the prototype. "What's this?" Richard picked up the device, turning it over in his hands. "That's a hydraulic pressure optimization system I've been developing," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. "It's designed to address the energy inefficiency issues in our main production line. With your permission, I'd like to show you how it works and what it could mean for Henderson's bottom line." Richard glanced at the Automatech representatives, then back at Marcus. "You have 30 minutes, but I should tell you up front, we're very close to finalizing the Automatech contract. The board vote is this afternoon. I understand, sir. I wouldn't have asked for this meeting if I didn't think I had something worth your time." Marcus pulled up his first slide, not the usual corporate template with bullet points and stock photos, but a detailed schematic of Henderson's current hydraulic system with inefficiency points highlighted in red. Our main production line operates at approximately 68% energy efficiency, he began. The primary issue is pressure fluctuation in the hydraulic distribution system. When demand spikes, the current system overcompensates, then overcorrects, creating a cascade of inefficiencies that compound throughout the production day. He could see Richard leaning forward slightly, interest flickering in his eyes. The Automatech representatives looked less pleased. The current loss from these inefficiencies is approximately $4.2 million annually in excess energy costs, Marcus continued, advancing to the next slide, showing detailed cost breakdowns. That's based on our current energy rates and production volume. We're aware of the inefficiency problem, David Chen from Automatech interjected. That's exactly why our system— If I may, Marcus interrupted, something he would never normally do, but this was his 30 minutes. The Automatech solution is comprehensive, but it's designed for complete system replacement. Implementation would require 18 months of phased installation with significant production disruption. He advanced to the comparison slide he'd prepared, showing the Automatech timeline and costs alongside his proposal. My system is a retrofit solution. It integrates with our existing infrastructure using predictive algorithms to anticipate pressure fluctuations before they occur. Rather than react to problems, it prevents them. Marcus picked up the prototype, his hands completely steady now. This was his element, explaining engineering problems to people who needed solutions. The core innovation is in the sensor array and control algorithm. Traditional systems measure pressure at fixed intervals and adjust reactively. This system uses continuous monitoring with machine learning to recognize patterns in pressure demand based on production schedules, ambient temperature, and even day of the week. He demonstrated on the prototype, showing how the sensors fed data to the control unit, how the algorithm processed that data in real time, how the hydraulic valves adjusted with precision measured in milliseconds. Richard was no longer leaning forward. He was leaning back, eyes narrow with concentration, the prototype now on the table in front of him, where he could examine it more closely. "What's the projected energy savings?" he asked. 35% reduction in energy costs on the main production line, which translates to approximately $1.4 million in annual savings. That's a conservative estimate based on 6 months of data collection and simulation. And implementation timeline. 6 weeks with minimal production disruption. The system can be installed in phases, with each phase becoming operational before the next begins. We'd see partial savings within the first 2 weeks. Robert Martinez from Automatech shifted in his seat. "With all due respect, Mr. Henderson, this is an amateur solution to a complex problem. Our system offers complete integration. How much did you say this cost to build?" Richard interrupted, still looking at the prototype. "The prototype? Less than $10,000. A full production version for the main line would cost approximately $180,000, including installation and a 3-month monitoring period to optimize the algorithms." Richard picked up the cost comparison sheet Marcus had prepared. "Your system costs less than $200,000. Automatech's proposal is $8.2 million, but our system offers so much more than just hydraulic optimization," David Chen said, his smooth sales pitch kicking in. "We're talking about a complete digital transformation, AI-driven predictive maintenance, IoT sensor integration across all systems, real-time analytics." "That we don't need," Marcus said quietly. "Sir, if I may be direct, Automatech is selling you a Ferrari when what you need is a reliable truck. Their system is impressive, but it's over-engineered for our actual problems. The room went silent. Marcus had just contradicted a vendor in front of the CEO, violated about a dozen unspoken corporate hierarchy rules, and probably ended any chance he had of salvaging his career at Henderson. But Richard was smiling. "Show me the data," he said. "I want to see your 6 months of collection, the simulation results, everything." Marcus spent the next 20 minutes walking through spreadsheets, performance graphs, and simulation videos. He showed Richard exactly where the current system was failing, precisely how his solution addressed those failures, and conservatively what the financial impact would be. The Automatech representatives tried several times to interject, to point out features their system had that Marcus's didn't, to emphasize the importance of future-proofing and scalability. Each time, Richard waved them off, his attention focused completely on Marcus's data. Finally, Richard sat back in his chair, the prototype in his hands again. "This is remarkable work, Marcus. Why am I only seeing this now?" Marcus could have blamed Brian, could have explained that he'd tried to present it through proper channels and been dismissed, could have made it someone else's fault. Instead, he said, "I should have pushed harder to get it in front of you sooner, sir. I let bureaucracy and other concerns stop me from doing what I knew was right." Richard nodded slowly, as if that answer satisfied him more than excuses would have. "Gentlemen," he said to the Automatech representatives, "I appreciate you coming in early, but I'm going to need to postpone this afternoon's board vote. I want our engineering team to fully evaluate both proposals before we make a final decision." David Chen's professional smile faltered. "Mr. Henderson, with respect, we have the competing offer I mentioned. If we don't finalize terms today, then you'll need to make a decision about that offer," Richard said, his tone pleasant but firm. "Henderson Manufacturing has been in business for over 70 years. We don't make $8 million decisions on artificially compressed timelines." After the Automatech representatives left, their departure lacking the confident swagger they'd entered with, Richard turned to Marcus. "How long would it take you to prepare a full technical review for the board? I want cost-benefit analysis, implementation timeline, risk assessment, the works." Marcus thought fast. 3 days, maybe 4 if you want it really comprehensive." "You have until Friday morning. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for Friday afternoon." Richard stood, extending his hand. "And Marcus, I'm sorry no one was listening before. That's on us, not you." The handshake was firm, the kind Marcus's father had taught him meant something. Trust, respect, a deal made between men who understood the value of their word. Patricia escorted him out, and as they walked down the hallway she said quietly, "That was well done. I've worked with Richard for 15 years. I've never seen him shut down a vendor presentation like that." "I might have just made some very powerful enemies," Marcus said, the reality of what he'd just done starting to sink in. "Probably," Patricia agreed, "but you might have also saved a lot of jobs." The board was leaning toward the Automatech deal because it sounded impressive. Sometimes people forget that impressive and effective aren't the same thing. Marcus walked back to his truck in a daze, the empty prototype case swinging at his side. The sun had fully risen now, washing the parking lot in pale November light. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, his hands on the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. His phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. "Where are you? Brian is looking for you and he seems pissed." Marcus smiled grimly and started the engine. Time to face the music. The engineering department felt different when he walked in at 8:45. Or maybe it was just him who had changed. Conversations stopped as he passed, colleagues looking up from their screens with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. Word traveled fast in an office, and apparently his absence from the regular 8 o'clock staff meeting had been noted. Brian was waiting at Marcus's cubicle, arms crossed, face red. My office, now." The walk felt longer than it had on Friday, but this time Marcus wasn't anxious. He was tired, bone-deep tired from the weekend of preparation and the adrenaline crash following the presentation. But he wasn't afraid. Brian closed the door hard enough to rattle the framed certificates on his wall. "What the hell were you thinking?" he started, not bothering with preamble. "Going over my head to the CEO, presenting some garage project like you're going to save the company. I was thinking that Henderson is about to spend $8 million on a solution we don't need when I have a better option that costs a fraction of that," Marcus said calmly. "You have a better option." Brian's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You have a hobby project built from spare parts. Automatech is an industry-leading firm with implementations at Fortune 500 companies. But sure, your little prototype is better. It is better for what we need." Marcus kept his voice level, professional. "I showed Richard the data. He agreed it was worth evaluating." "You showed?" Brian stopped, his face going from red to purple. "You understand that you just undermined months of work. The Automatech deal was almost finalized. Do you have any idea how much political capital I spent getting the board on board with that?" And there it was. This wasn't about what was best for Henderson Manufacturing. It was about Brian's ego, his reputation, his relationship with vendors who probably wined and dined him while pitching their expensive solutions. "I'm sorry if my presentation complicated things for you," Marcus said, and he was surprised to find he meant it. Not sorry for doing it, but sorry that Brian had made choices that put him in this position. "But my job is to solve engineering problems, not to protect anyone's political capital." "Your job," Brian said, jabbing a finger at Marcus, "was to take the retirement package and go quietly. Instead, you've made yourself into a problem. Well, congratulations. You're officially suspended pending an investigation into insubordination and violation of chain of command." Marcus had expected anger. He'd even expected retaliation, but suspension still felt like a punch to the gut. "Violation of chain of command?" he repeated. "I sent an email to the CEO's assistant requesting a meeting. That's not a violation of anything. You presented confidential company information without authorization. You contradicted approved strategic initiatives. You publicly embarrassed a vendor partner." Brian was ticking items off on his fingers now, building his case. "Security will escort you out. You'll be notified about the investigation within 3 business days." Brian, we're done here." Brian opened his office door, and sure enough, 2 security guards were waiting in the hallway. "Someone will box up your personal items and send them to your home address." The walk through the engineering department to the exit was the longest of Marcus's life. Colleagues stared, some with sympathy, others with the careful neutrality of people who didn't want to be associated with whatever trouble he was in. Jennifer looked stricken, half rising from her desk, before a sharp look from Brian made her sit back down. The security guards were professional, not unkind, but the message was clear. Marcus Washington, 27 years of service, was being removed from the premises like a security threat. The November air hit him like a slap when he stepped outside. He stood in the parking lot, the building he'd worked in for more than half his adult life looming behind him, and felt the full weight of his situation settle onto his shoulders. He'd gambled everything, his job, his reputation, his carefully maintained professional relationships, on a meeting with the CEO and a prototype built in his garage. And now he was suspended, probably soon to be fired, with nothing to show for it but the knowledge that at least he'd tried. His phone rang. Monica. "Hey, Dad, how'd the presentation go?" Marcus got in his truck before answering, not wanting to have this conversation in the Henderson parking lot. "The presentation went well," he said. Richard Henderson wants a full technical review by Friday, but your old man also just got suspended for insubordination." There was a long pause on the other end. "Then, they suspended you for presenting a cost-saving solution, for going over my boss's head and contradicting a vendor he'd already approved." Marcus started the truck, its engine rumbling to life. "Brian was pretty clear that I was supposed to take the retirement package and disappear quietly." "Dad, that's retaliation. You were acting in the company's best interest. Any competent employment lawyer would—" "I don't want to sue Henderson," Marcus interrupted. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" Marcus thought about that as he pulled out of the parking lot, watching the building shrink in his rearview mirror. What was it about? Proving Brian wrong, proving himself right, saving jobs, all of those things and none of them. "It's about not going quietly," he said finally. "For 27 years I did good work and kept my head down and let other people take credit. I let them pass me over for promotions. I let them tell me my ideas weren't worth pursuing. And I told myself it was fine because I was being professional, being a team player. And now? Now I'm tired of being professional if professional means invisible. Richard Henderson gave me until Friday to prove my system works. So that's what I'm going to do." After they hung up, Marcus drove home through mid-morning traffic, his mind already working through what he needed to do. A full technical review meant stress testing, failure analysis, comparative cost modeling, implementation planning. It meant 3 days of 18-hour workdays and probably more time in his garage than in his bed. But first, he needed to make a stop. 20 minutes later, he pulled up to a small machine shop in a working-class neighborhood near the old Packard plant. Joe's Custom Fabrication had been there since the 1970s, one of the thousands of small businesses that had survived Detroit's collapse and slow resurrection through sheer stubbornness and quality work. Joe Riley himself was in the shop, a 68-year-old Irishman with permanently grease-stained hands and an encyclopedic knowledge of metalworking. He and Marcus had known each other for 15 years, ever since Marcus had brought him a rush job on a custom hydraulic fitting that no one else could make. "Marcus Washington," Joe called out over the sound of a lathe. "Don't usually see you on a Monday morning. Playing hooky?" Something like that. Marcus explained the situation, the presentation, the suspension, the Friday deadline. Joe listened, wiping his hands on a rag that was probably dirtier than his hands. When Marcus finished, the old machinist shook his head. "Corporate idiots. Present them with a solution to their problems, and they punish you for it." He walked over to his workbench, pulling out a notebook. "What do you need?" "Production quality components for a full-scale prototype. I can't present the board with something held together with salvage parts and hope. It needs to look professional. Send me the specifications. I'll have everything ready by Wednesday." Joe paused. "And Marcus, I'm not charging you. This is on me." "Joe, I can't let you. You can and you will. Henderson Manufacturing laid off my nephew 2 years ago. Told him at 47 he was too old to retrain for their new systems. He's been working warehouse jobs ever since." Joe's jaw was set in a way that Marcus recognized, the stubborn determination of a man who'd made up his mind. "If your gadget can save jobs, then I want to be part of that. Consider it my contribution to sticking it to corporate short-sightedness." Marcus felt something in his chest loosen slightly. He wasn't alone in this. Maybe he'd been suspended, and maybe Brian was building a case to fire him, but he had allies. People who believed in him, in his work, in the idea that experience and expertise still mattered. He spent the rest of Monday in his garage, breaking down the technical review into manageable sections. Financial analysis, cost comparison between his system and Automatech's, projected ROI, implementation costs. technical specifications, detailed schematics, parts list, installation procedures, risk assessment, what could go wrong, contingency plans, warranty and maintenance considerations. Performance validation, stress test results, simulation data, real-world application scenarios. By midnight, he had outlines for all 4 sections and a pounding headache. He heated up leftover soup, took 2 aspirin, and fell into bed with his alarm set for 5 a.m. Tuesday morning, he drove to Henderson Manufacturing, parking across the street with a clear view of the main entrance. He wasn't supposed to be on company property, but there was no rule against watching it from public space. At 7:45, he saw what he was looking for, Jennifer Chen arriving for the early shift. He called her cell. "Marcus, where are you?" "Across the street. Can you talk?" She walked to the edge of the parking lot, scanning until she spotted his truck. "Are you okay? Everyone's talking about what happened. The official story is you were suspended for policy violations, but the rumor mill has like 6 different versions." "I need a favor," Marcus said. "I need production data from the main hydraulic line for the last 6 months. Energy consumption, pressure readings, maintenance logs, everything." There was a long pause. "Marcus, I'm already on thin ice. Brian made it very clear that anyone helping you would face disciplinary action. I know, and I wouldn't ask if I had any other option, but I need that data to complete the technical review Richard Henderson requested." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "The data's on the shared server. I'll compile it and email it from my personal account during lunch. But Marcus, this is it. I can't do anything else. I have student loans and rent, and I can't afford to lose this job." "I understand. Thank you, Jennifer. Truly." The data arrived at 12:47 p.m., 6 months of detailed logs compressed into spreadsheets that would take hours to analyze properly. Marcus sent Jennifer a thank you text and got to work, pulling the data into analysis software, looking for patterns and anomalies, building the statistical case for his system's effectiveness. Wednesday morning, Joe called. "Components are ready. Better than you specified, actually. I had some aerospace-grade materials left over from another job. Your prototype's going to be built like a tank." Marcus picked up the components at noon, marveling at Joe's craftsmanship. These weren't hobby parts. They were precision-engineered pieces that belonged in a professional installation. He spent Wednesday afternoon and evening assembling the new prototype, this one sleek and professional-looking, with proper housing and labeled components. By Thursday morning, he had a complete technical review, 47 pages of detailed analysis, comprehensive cost modeling, and performance data that showed beyond any doubt that his system could do exactly what he'd claimed. The new prototype sat on his workbench, gleaming under the workshop lights, ready to be demonstrated. He emailed everything to Patricia Patterson at 7:15 Thursday evening with a note. "Technical review as requested. I'm available if the board has any questions during tomorrow's meeting." Her response came 15 minutes later. "Received. The meeting is scheduled for 2 p.m. in the executive boardroom. Mr. Henderson has requested you attend to present your findings and answer questions." Marcus read the email 3 times. Richard Henderson wanted him to present to the board, not just submit his review for others to discuss, but to be there in person, to defend his work, to make his case directly to the people who would decide Henderson Manufacturing's future, and probably his own. He called Monica. "I'm presenting to the board tomorrow," he told her. 2 p.m. "Dad, that's incredible. Are you ready?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I have the data. I have a solid prototype. But I've never presented to a board before. These are people who make million-dollar decisions before breakfast. What if I freeze up? What if I can't answer their questions?" "Then you remember that you're Marcus Washington," Monica said firmly. "You're a Marine who served your country. You're an engineer who's built a career on solving impossible problems. You're my father, who raised me to never back down from doing what's right." And you're the man Mom fell in love with because you were smart and stubborn and refused to accept that things couldn't be better." After they hung up, Marcus sat in his garage, looking at the prototype, at the technical review printed and bound, at the life he'd built in this house and this city over 63 years. Tomorrow, he'd walk into that boardroom and face the people who'd decided he was too old to matter, and he'd show them exactly how wrong they were. Marcus didn't sleep Thursday night. He lay in bed watching the ceiling fan rotate slowly, his mind rehearsing the presentation, anticipating questions, preparing responses. At 3 a.m. he gave up and went to the kitchen, making coffee and reviewing his notes one more time under the harsh fluorescent lights. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. "You always do this before something important. You overanalyze, second-guess yourself, imagine everything that could go wrong. And then you walk in and you're brilliant because you know your stuff inside and out. I hope you're right," he said to the empty kitchen. By 6 a.m. he'd showered, dressed in his best suit again, and loaded the new prototype carefully into his truck. The Detroit morning was cold and clear, the kind of November day where the sky was painfully blue and your breath fogged in the air. Rush hour traffic was building, but Marcus had given himself plenty of time. He couldn't be late for this. He arrived at Henderson Manufacturing at noon, 4 hours early. Patricia Patterson had arranged for a guest pass that would let him access the executive floor, but nowhere else in the building. The security guard who issued it looked at him with recognition, but said nothing, just handed over the badge with a professional nod. Marcus set up in the executive boardroom at 12:30. It was even more impressive than the conference room where he'd met with Richard. Oil paintings of the 3 Henderson generations who'd run the company, a mahogany table that could seat 30, windows offering a panoramic view of the Detroit River and the city skyline. This was where the real decisions happened, where the future of 2,000 employees and their families would be determined. He connected his laptop to the presentation system, tested the display twice, and positioned the prototype at the front of the room where everyone would be able to see it clearly. His hands were steady. That surprised him. He'd expected nerves, but instead he felt a strange calm, the same feeling he'd had before difficult missions in the Marines. The preparation was done. Now it was just execution. At 1:45, board members started arriving. Marcus recognized some from company newsletters and annual reports, distinguished men and women in their 50s and 60s, the kind of people who sat on multiple boards and made decisions affecting thousands of lives. They nodded politely to him, examining the prototype with curiosity as they took their seats. Brian arrived at 1:50, stopping short when he saw Marcus. His face went through a rapid series of expressions, surprise, anger, calculation, before settling on professional neutrality. He took a seat near the back without speaking. Richard Henderson entered at 1:58, followed by Patricia and the company's CFO, Helen Okoye, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who Marcus had never met, but whose reputation for financial rigor was legendary. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began as the clock hit 2. "Thank you for gathering on short notice. I know we were scheduled to vote on the Automatech proposal today, but something's come up that deserves your attention. Marcus Washington, one of our senior hydraulic engineers, has developed an alternative solution to our energy efficiency problems. Marcus, the floor is yours." Marcus stood, clicked to his first slide, and began. "Good afternoon. My name is Marcus Washington. I've been with Henderson Manufacturing for 27 years, working primarily in hydraulic systems design and optimization." He paused, making eye contact with several board members. "I'm here today because I believe we're about to make an $8 million mistake." That got their attention. Several board members sat up straighter. The Automatech proposal is impressive. It's comprehensive, cutting-edge, and it addresses many of our operational challenges. But it's also over-engineered for our actual needs, expensive to implement, and risky in its scope. He clicked to the next slide, a side-by-side comparison of the two proposals. Our primary problem is energy inefficiency in the main production line hydraulic system, costing us approximately $4.2 million annually. The Automatech solution treats this as one symptom of a larger technological deficit and proposes a complete digital transformation. My solution treats it as a specific engineering problem with a targeted fix. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus walked them through his technical review. He explained the root cause of the pressure fluctuations, demonstrated how his predictive algorithm worked, showed them stress test results and simulation data. When he spoke about the prototype, he picked it up, explaining each component, how they worked together, why his approach was more elegant and effective than replacing the entire system. Implementation timeline is 6 weeks with minimal disruption, he continued. Total cost including installation and a 3-month optimization period is $186,000. Annual savings are conservatively estimated at $1.4 million, giving us an ROI of 752% in the first year. Helen Okoye, the CFO, raised her hand. These projections are based on simulations. What gives you confidence they'll hold up in real-world application? The prototype has been tested under conditions that exceed our maximum production load, Marcus responded. I've also incorporated a significant safety margin into all calculations. The actual savings could be higher, but I wanted to ensure my projections were defensible. What about scalability? Another board member asked. If this works on the main line, can it be implemented elsewhere? Absolutely. The system is modular and can be adapted to any hydraulic system in our facility. I've already identified 3 other production lines where implementation would generate additional savings of approximately $800,000 annually. Questions came rapid-fire after that. Marcus answered each one, sometimes referring to his technical review, sometimes pulling up additional data on his laptop, sometimes simply drawing on 27 years of experience with Henderson systems. He knew this facility, knew its quirks and weaknesses, knew where the bodies were buried in ways that no outside consultant ever could. 45 minutes into the presentation, Richard raised his hand. Marcus, I want to address the elephant in the room. Brian suspended you earlier this week for what he termed insubordination and violation of chain of command. Can you explain your perspective on that? Marcus glanced at Brian, who was staring at the table, face carefully neutral. I sent an email to your assistant requesting a meeting because I believed I had information relevant to a major financial decision. I thought the board should have complete information before committing $8 million. He paused. If that's insubordination, then yes, I'm guilty, but I'd make the same choice again. One of the older board members, a woman named Margaret Chen, who'd been with the company since the 1980s, spoke up. Mr. Kowalski, you're head of the engineering department. Why wasn't this solution brought to the board's attention through normal channels? Brian shifted uncomfortably. We receive numerous proposals from engineers. Not all of them are viable for board-level consideration. I made a judgment call that this particular project wasn't ready for executive review. But you didn't make a judgment call about Automatech? Margaret's tone was pointed. An $8 million proposal from an outside vendor was ready for board review, but a $200,000 solution from one of our own engineers wasn't. The Automatech proposal was comprehensive. It addressed multiple systems. It addressed problems we don't have, Marcus interrupted, then caught himself. I apologize for speaking out of turn. But with respect, the Automatech proposal is a solution looking for a problem. It's impressive technology, but it's not what Henderson needs right now. Richard leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Let's talk about risk. Marcus, what's the worst-case scenario with your system? What happens if it fails? Marcus appreciated the directness. Worst case, the system doesn't deliver the projected savings and we've spent $186,000 on an experiment that didn't work. We'd still have our existing hydraulic system intact and functional. We could roll back the changes with minimal cost. And Automatech's worst case. We spent $8 million and 18 months implementing a system that disrupts production, requires extensive retraining, and may or may not solve our actual problems. If it fails, we've lost both the money and the time, and we'd still need to fix the underlying hydraulic issues. Helen Okoye was reviewing something on her tablet. Marcus, your cost projections show the system paying for itself in less than 2 months. That seems almost too good to be true. It would be if we were building something from scratch, but we're leveraging existing infrastructure and addressing a specific inefficiency point. The ROI is high because the problem is expensive and the solution is targeted. Marcus pulled up a detailed cost breakdown. I've itemized every component, every labor hour, every contingency. The numbers are solid. The questions continued for another hour. The board wanted to understand failure modes, maintenance requirements, compatibility with existing systems, intellectual property ownership, implementation risk. Marcus answered each question, sometimes admitting uncertainty, but never bluffing or exaggerating. Finally, at 4:15 p.m., Richard called for a break. We're going to deliberate in private, he told Marcus. You're welcome to wait in the conference room next door. We'll call you back in when we've reached a decision. Marcus gathered his materials and walked to the adjacent conference room on legs that had gone slightly numb from standing for over 2 hours. Patricia brought him water and coffee, giving him an encouraging smile, but saying nothing. He sat alone, watching the sun start its descent toward the horizon, turning the Detroit River gold. His phone buzzed with texts, Monica asking how it went, Jennifer requesting an update, even a message from Joe Riley. Knock 'em dead, kid. 45 minutes passed, then an hour. Marcus tried not to read anything into the delay. Maybe they were having a robust discussion. Maybe they were deadlocked. Maybe they'd already decided against him and were just figuring out how to deliver the news. At 5:30, Patricia opened the door. They're ready for you. Marcus walked back into the boardroom. The board members' faces were unreadable, professional masks that revealed nothing. Richard stood at the head of the table, the prototype in his hands. Marcus, we've voted on 3 proposals today. First, the Automatech contract. Second, your hydraulic optimization system. And third, some organizational changes that we felt were necessary given recent events. Marcus's heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The Automatech contract has been rejected by a vote of 8-2. The board feels that while the technology is impressive, it's not aligned with our current needs or financial situation. Several board members nodded. Brian's face had gone pale. Your hydraulic optimization system has been approved by a vote of 9-1, with funding authorized for immediate implementation. Helen will work with you on a detailed budget, but we're prepared to commit up to $250,000 to ensure it's done right. Marcus felt the room tilt slightly. They'd approved it. The board had actually approved it. Additionally, Richard continued, we've made some organizational changes. Effective immediately, Brian Kowalski is being reassigned from head of engineering to a project management role. We feel his talents are better suited to that position. Brian stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. This is because I suspended Washington. You're demoting me for following protocol. You're being reassigned because you failed to recognize and elevate a solution that could save this company millions of dollars, Margaret Chen said coldly. Because you let personal ego interfere with good judgment, and because several engineers have reported a work environment that discourages innovation and punishes initiative. Brian looked around the room, seeming to realize that this decision was final and unanimous. Without another word, he grabbed his briefcase and walked out, the door closing hard behind him. "Marcus," Richard said, "we'd like to offer you the position of Director of Engineering Innovation. It's a new role, reporting directly to me, focused on identifying and developing exactly the kind of practical, cost-effective solutions you've demonstrated today. The salary is $165,000, plus performance bonuses tied to implemented innovations." Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. Director of Engineering Innovation, a $50,000 raise, reporting to the CEO. "I know we've put you through hell this week," Richard continued. "The suspension is rescinded with a formal apology. You'll receive back pay for the days you were out, plus a $25,000 signing bonus for the new role. And Marcus?" He held up the prototype. "This belongs to Henderson Manufacturing now, but we're also filing a patent in your name. Any future licensing revenue will be split 50-50 with you personally." "I don't know what to say," Marcus managed finally. "Say you'll take the job," Helen Okoye said with a smile. "We need people who actually solve problems instead of just talking about innovation." "Yes," Marcus said. "Yes, I'll take it." The board members stood, several coming over to shake his hand, to congratulate him, to ask questions about implementation timeline and next steps. Margaret Chen pulled him aside. "My father worked for Henderson in the 60s and 70s, she said quietly. "He was one of the first black foremen in this facility. He fought every day to prove he belonged there, that he wasn't just a diversity hire or a token. He'd be proud of what you did this week. Standing up, fighting for what you knew was right, not backing down even when it cost you." "Thank you," Marcus said, his throat tight. By 6 p.m., he was back in his truck, the prototype secured in the passenger seat, his head spinning from the sudden reversal of fortune. A week ago, he'd been told he was too old to matter. Now he was Director of Engineering Innovation with a mandate to transform how Henderson approached problem-solving. He called Monica as he pulled out of the parking lot. "They approved it," he said when she answered, "all of it, and they offered me a position directing innovation for the whole company." Her scream of joy was so loud he had to hold the phone away from his ear. "Dad, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you." "I'm still processing it," he admitted. "A week ago I thought my career was over. Now you've proven that experience and expertise still matter, that good engineering and persistence can win over expensive consultants and ageism. Dad, do you know how many people are going to hear about this? How many engineers who've been told they're too old or too out of touch?" Marcus hadn't thought about that. He'd been focused on saving his job, on proving his worth to Henderson. But Monica was right. This was bigger than just him. He drove home through rush-hour traffic, watching the city lights come on as dusk settled over Detroit. The radio was playing old Motown, and Marcus found himself singing along, something he hadn't done since Sarah passed. His garage looked different when he pulled in. It was still cluttered, still full of half-finished projects and salvaged parts. But now it felt less like a refuge from a disappointing career and more like a laboratory where real innovation happened, where a 63-year-old engineer built the solution that corporate consultants had missed. His phone rang. Jennifer Chen. "Marcus, oh my God, is it true? The email just went out. You're the new Director of Engineering Innovation." "It's true. That's amazing. And Brian's been reassigned. People are literally celebrating in the engineering department. Someone ordered pizza. It's like a party." Marcus smiled. "Tell everyone I'll be in Monday morning. And Jennifer, thank you for the data, for believing in me, for taking the risk." "Are you kidding? Thank you. You just showed everyone that speaking up and doing good work actually matters. That's huge." After they hung up, Marcus walked through his house, seeing it with fresh eyes. Sarah's photos on the mantel, Marcus's Marine Corps memorabilia, Monica's childhood artwork still framed on the walls. This was a home where people had built a life through hard work, persistence, and refusing to accept that things couldn't be better. He thought about the next chapter, implementing the hydraulic system, building a team to identify other efficiency improvements, changing the culture at Henderson from one that dismissed experience to one that valued it. It would be hard work. There would be resistance, setbacks, failures, but Marcus Washington had faced worse. He'd served his country in the Marines. He'd built a career despite discrimination and setbacks. He'd lost the love of his life and kept going. He'd been told he was too old to matter and proven them spectacularly wrong. He made himself dinner, a real dinner, not just reheated leftovers, and sat at the kitchen table planning the next 6 weeks of implementation. The hydraulic system would go live in phases, each success building confidence for the next. He'd need to hire engineers, probably some of the people Henderson had laid off as too old or too expensive. He'd show the board that experience wasn't a liability, it was their competitive advantage. His phone buzzed with a text from Joe Riley. "Heard the news. Told you corporate idiots would come around. Drinks on me tomorrow." Marcus smiled and texted back, "You're on." Then Monica called back, this time with his 8-year-old granddaughter Emma on the line. "Grandpa, Mom says you're a hero." "I don't know about that, sweetheart. She says you saved lots of people's jobs. That's what heroes do." Marcus looked at Sarah's photo on the mantel, at her smile that had carried him through 40 years of marriage and 2 years of loss. "Your grandma was the hero," he told Emma. "She taught me to never give up, to always fight for what's right, to believe that one person can make a difference. Will you tell me about her?" So Marcus did. He told his granddaughter about the woman who'd believed in a young Marine coming home from service, who'd supported his decision to become an engineer, who'd encouraged every crazy idea and ambitious project, who'd told him right up until the end that he was capable of extraordinary things if he just had the courage to believe it. After the call ended, Marcus sat in the quiet house, feeling the weight of the past week settling into memory. He thought about Brian's words, "At your age, how much innovation can we really expect?" and smiled. Quite a lot, as it turned out. He opened his laptop and started drafting a plan for his first 90 days as Director of Engineering Innovation. There was work to do, problems to solve, a company to help save, but for the first time in 2 years, Marcus Washington felt something he'd thought he'd lost when Sarah died. Purpose. And maybe, just maybe, hope for the future. Outside, Detroit's November night had fully settled, cold and clear with stars just visible through the city's light pollution. Inside, a 63-year-old engineer who'd been told he was too old to matter was designing the future, and proving that sometimes the best innovations come not from disrupting everything, but from experience, persistence, and the courage to believe that you still have something valuable to contribute, no matter what anyone else says.